All right, well, firstly, on behalf of Geoff, Nick and myself, we'd like to welcome you all to have a little bit of a look around Blythewood and what we do. Hopefully, a little bit of feedback and discussion. We'll be able to learn from you all on the mistakes that we're making, or perhaps some of the things that we are doing are good. The McLartys first came to the Peel region in 1839, and Blythewood was taken up in the 1850s. Geoff and I are fifth generation farmers at Blythewood, and of course Nick's a sixth generation farmer, and hopefully his sons, Hugh and George, will be seventh generation, and hopefully they'll be able to carry on the family tradition. I think agriculture, that's one of the challenges agriculture does face, is keeping young people, especially generation farmers in agriculture. The knowledge and experience that can be passed on is fairly important, that we keep that. And to make it easier to pass the farms on, or we should somehow sort of find a way that we can pass the farms on to our next generation. Blythewood consists of 4,000 acres, which is approximately 1,600 hectares. The soil types are mainly sand over clay and river loam, and the natural vegetation here was red gum, Pinjarra and blackboy country. Geoff, Nick and I are the major labour force at Blythewood, with only shearers and the occasional contractor brought in to do work. At the moment, on the property, we have 640 breeder cows, which are made up of 400 shorthorns, 200 shorthorn Simmental cross, and about 40 Red Angus shorthorn cross. 100 of these shorthorn cows are crossed with Simmental bulls. 300 of them go straight. 300 of the shorthorn cows go back to us shorthorn bulls. The 200 Simmental shorthorn cross cows are crossed with Red Angus bulls, and our first calving heifers, our maiden heifers, are crossed with Red Angus. Also on the place at the moment, we have 50 replacement heifers. Not as many this year as usual, but our numbers sort of built up over the last few years. There's 30 bulls and 150 bought-in store steers, which we trade. I'll speak about the trading we do in a little while. We also have 300 breeder ewes, which are due to start lambing in the next few weeks. The crossbred breeding at Blythewood started some years ago when my father and uncle first, I think back in the 60s, they first introduced some red pole bulls. Blythewood's always traditionally been shorthorn based. Well, they brought red pole bulls in mainly to improve the milk quality in the cows, which worked very well back then. We then moved on to limo bulls, just for terminal size, but probably found the limos, although the yielding and meat quality was good, perhaps the carcass weights weren't what we wanted. We also tried Herefords, and now we've got the Simmentals and Red Angus. Last year, after going to a day at John and Roger Dawkins' property at North Danlop, we saw what they were doing with the marbling of the Wagyu cattle. And because we'd been involved some years ago with Rob Nottle at Three Springs when he supplied the high marbled long-fed beef to Japan, it sort of got our interest a little bit to see what the Dawkins were doing. And we were sort of keen to cross some of the Wagyus, or they suggested to us we would take some Wagyu bulls and cross them with our shorthorns. So we did that this year, and we've got about 30 calves on the ground. We were a little bit sceptical about what they were going to be like, the Wagyus, but so far they've ticked the first box. The calves are a lot better than what we thought they'd be. Or when I say that, they are nice, growthy calves with a muscle definition. So far so good. Only time will tell. I don't reckon the bulls look all that great, but that's not what we're looking at. At the end, we're looking at what quality sort of meat we get and how they convert after being after they've been in the feedlot. As I said, we trade steers. We buy in usually around about 1,000 steers on top of what we have here. We take the opportunity when the grass when we've got excess grass. So at the moment, probably the toughest time of the year has been the last month or two. So our numbers are down. If the grass improves in a few weeks' time, well, then we'll start to buy a few more steers and take the opportunity to turn them over. Although we buy 1,000 steers in, usually at Blythewood we run between 1,500 and 2,000 cattle. So the steers aren't all brought in at once. It all depends on how the grass is and what opportunities we get. Usually around about August, September and October, those opportunities are there for quick turnover cattle. Marketing, we're always open to whatever opportunities are there for marketing, and we're not reliant just on one avenue. In recent years, we have supplied cattle to most of the processors in the southwest, and this has taught us to maximise the value of individual cattle and sort of find the markets that suit that animal the best. Yeah, as you'll find that some abattoirs will sort of have better yielding in their kills, and others will, there'll be different things with fat scores and whatnot. So we've just found that by dealing with different abattoirs, we've learned to send the cattle that suit that market to that abattoir or to that processor. In recent years, or the last couple of years especially, the live shipping has been very important, and I think it's actually really been the cream of the markets over the last couple of years. It's an easy market to supply, and we're yet to get a dark cutter, an over fat, a dentition. They just all go through, and the money's been very good. So live shipping has been very important as a competitor to the abattoirs, but we're also very aware of the fact that you can't rely, and we're not certain where that's going to be going in the future. So it's very important that abattoirs stay viable and that we keep on supporting them as well. Probably the last thing I want to talk about is MSA, and this will come up a little bit later on, but to us, MSA is a very important tool for marketing and promoting beef throughout Australia. But I think, like a lot of other producers out there, we'd like to see a little bit more consistency, not in the grading. I think the grading is very good, but consistency the way that the abattoirs use or use MSA. Just for an example, an MSA, as much as it's used to promote beef, it's sometimes used as a discounting tool as well. But MSA has it's where its fat scores come from, dentition, well, ossification, but the aging of the animal. But quite often we see the abattoirs are using their own, well, they always do use their own fat spot to take from, and the dentition is what the aging of the animal is. So I think a lot of us, and what we've found by using different abattoirs is that you'll have a big variance in the same animal depending on where you send it. So an animal that might go 15 mils at one abattoir, the same fat will actually measure at around about 10 mils at another. And that's around about what it can be, within 4 or 5 mils difference. I suppose we've learned to send the cattle to where we're going to get maximum value. But I think for a lot of producers, it'd be a lot easier if we all had the same statistics to look at, or the same readings to look at. And so going forward and doing these Wagyu cattle and whatnot, and I think it was mentioned that probably Western Australia has some of the best cattle in Australia. With the MSA, although we produce these beautiful cattle and meet all the standards of MSA, we've never ever been given a bonus for those ones that get to the top. But we don't want to, at any stage, sort of knock what the abattoirs are doing or the processors are doing. We do understand that they have their markets, and it's up to us to produce those cattle that suit their markets. That's about all I've got to say, so I think we'll move on back to you, Esther.
Perhaps, Sarah, you might like to provide some feedback to the comments that the team have made so far.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. Great to be involved this afternoon. I guess there was a couple of things there that I picked up on, differences between abattoirs, I guess, to start with. In particular, you called out fat measurement there. And I mean, the MSA grading system does use fat. It uses actually the rib fat measurement to predict eating quality. And then there's P8 fat. So that's up on the rump site, which gets is part of the Osmeat language. Look, both of those things, I mean, P8 has been used as a proxy, if you like, to help processors determine yield. I think the sooner we can move away from single measurement sites like that, things like dentition will be beneficial for everybody. And some of the investments that I guess MLA's got, but so have commercial processors as well, is trying to find objective carcass measurements that will not just look at a single measurement site on a carcass to tell us about yield, but look at things like whether it's X-ray based systems or CT scanning. We actually get the entire animal's, or a scan of the entire animal to get a whole yield picture and not just a single measurement site. I mean, that research is happening and people are starting to actually implement that commercially. So it is happening, but it will take some time. I guess for now we have got P8, which is the Osmeat requirement, and it is a standard site that Osmeat have specified where it needs to be measured, but there's humans measuring it. So I guess that's a variable that we deal with even in MSA grading, that there are humans operating that equipment, and they are allowed to be within different they are allowed to have some tolerances between those measurements as well. But I guess at the end of the day, there are humans operating the equipment. The other thing that can affect things like fat measurement, things like hide removal. So obviously processes run at different speeds. Hide removal systems can be a bit different. And sometimes depending on things like hydration of cattle can affect how smooth the hide comes off, which can affect things like fat getting torn and what have you at certain points. So there are a few variables in there that can affect those measurements. But I think the sooner we move to objective technologies to move away from single sites as a payment, if you like, the better. Esther, do you want me to just keep moving on to those couple of other points? Yeah. So I guess the other one is dentition. I love talking about dentition, or not talking about it, probably more so, because dentition is, the MSA system actually doesn't use dentition to predict eating quality. It's been shown time and time again that it's actually not a good predictor of, well, it's not a good predictor of anything except how many teeth a cow had. It doesn't get used to predict eating quality. It's not a great actual predictor of age. And so within the MSA system, we use ossification, which tells us more about the growth path of that animal. And actually that has an impact on how tough meat is. Dentition, I mean, it's still there though. When you look at pricing grids, it is there. And that's because it's been part of the Osmeat language as a carcass classification system for some time now. It's really entrenched in our trading systems. But again, this is something that's changing. So when you sell meat within Australia and definitely in export markets, describing a piece of meat by its dentition category has been the norm for a long time. But 2 years ago, we actually introduced a new category into the Osmeat language, which has got nothing to do with dentition. It's actually called EQG, Eating Quality Graded. So what it actually means is that processors can grade carcasses just on the merit of their eating quality and not be stuck into a dentition box or category, if you like. And processors, including some in WA, have actually jumped on board with this new category because it actually allows them to talk directly about the consumer, how the consumer is going to experience that piece of meat and not how many teeth they'll have. So that's been a change that's been, it was like processors were waiting for that to come available a couple of years ago because MSA has been so well adopted, and we're seeing good uptake of that. Again, whilst there's been good uptake by processors, all of these things take some time to get through the whole supply chain, because it actually means that we've actually changed the way our partners in export markets of trade talk in our trading language as well. But probably another one, that dentition, that we'd be happy to see from an MSA perspective, see the back of that as well, if we're actually about getting closer to talking about how the consumers, what they think about our meat. The other bit I guess I just picked up on there, Esther, was just really taking advantage of the good quality cattle in WA. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is just this explosion of brands of beef. And we've got over 200 brands now that are licensed with MSA, and they're brands from processors, or it might be individual producers that have decided to commit to make sure that their brand's being graded through MSA. And guess what we're seeing? And those brands travel all over the countryside. So you probably see quite a few brands from the eastern states in WA as well. And whilst they're all underpinned by MSA, they've all got some individual story. So it actually allows like the food service sector and the retail sector to pick up on those individual brands and try and find a point of difference for themselves. WA, so I've spent quite a bit of time in WA grading in the abattoirs over there when quite a few years ago. And WA was a really early adopter of MSA and jumped on board and took up MSA really well. It actually, about 50% of all the cattle in WA are MSA graded every year. So you've been early adopters of the program. What I still think there's a great opportunity for WA is the point you touched on before, is you've actually got higher quality cattle, or a higher proportion, if you like, of higher quality cattle than other states. So if you're used to seeing MSA feedback, there's something called an MSA index on there. And the average around the country is 57, but the average for WA is 60. And whilst it's only 3 points, that actually is quite a significant increase, if you like, above the national. So I think the opportunity is for all of us as within a supply chain, and us as MLA, and we do it, is actually working with the processors to recognise the value that's in those higher quality cattle and help them carve out, if you like, the market, or find the markets that will actually pay for pulling out those higher quality cattle and maybe putting them in a different brand or marketing them differently to really leverage off the quality you've got over there. And when we can do that, when we can help find customers that will actually be willing to pay for that higher quality, I mean, in theory, that flows back down the line as well. But so that's a fair bit of work. That's quite a big piece of work we do with WA from within the MSA program, is we do spend quite a bit of time with the processors there, looking to find those higher quality cattle and the opportunities on how to market those as well. There is a question in the chat about which abattoir is using dentition in WA. All AusMeat approved abattoirs it's actually mandatory for them to do measured dentition. They do need to look at it, and they do need to report it back.
Back to Leigh or Geoff, who has raised this subject. Does that commentary by Sarah ring true with you? Is it consistent with your observations?
Yeah, it is. It'd be interesting what other producers sort of think about. I mean, as I said before, I think the MSA grading is great. The graders are consistent. There's no doubt about that. But what we'd probably like to see, and I don't know how other producers, I don't know how Eric and Gordon and a few others out there who are out there feel about it, but I'd just like to see consistency in the way that they measure the other aspects of that carcass, so that, as I say, for us, we've dealt with abattoirs. We've learned to send those animals to where we'll be able to get the maximum profit from them. But I think there'd be a lot of people in the industry who are probably not, or who are getting discounted because they don't realise that there is a difference between the abattoirs. There's difference in the way they trim. There's difference in carcass percentages. There's difference in the way that fat's measured. And, some abattoirs will even give you a little bit of leeway if you're outside their weights. It often sort of makes us a little bit bemused that you'll be 0.5 of a kilo out of the weight range and you'll get perhaps a 40-cent deduction. Some abattoirs will tolerate it, some won't. So all these little bits and pieces, I don't think an animal that's 0.5 of a kilo outside of I know there's got to be a standard, it's got to be a cut-off point, but I don't think it'll make any difference to whether that animal goes to Woolworths, Coles, or the butcher down the road. And the farmer, the producer, is always the one who cops it in the neck as far as the financial side goes. But it'd be interesting actually if some of the other producers hopped in and how do they think about those things? Am I on the right track, or they disagree with me?
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of mates who I don't know, but Eric, do you have any comment or Mervyn?
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, I assumed that the grading was all standard, so it's a bit of news to me that realised that there is a difference between the abattoirs. But I do agree with Leigh. You know, if we are a very small percentage outside of that grid, I've had up to 60 cents a kilo docked on the whole animal just because I'm half a kilo out of the weight range, which I think is terrible and shouldn't happen. I know there should be a small penalty, but not 60 cents a kilo over the whole animal. So yeah, and like I said, I thought there was a standard for the whole lot, and that was what we were supposed to work to. So that's interesting to find out that there is a difference in those abattoirs.
Yeah, sorry. You know, we were probably found that as well this year, as we were lucky we could, I guess, having the stud cattle, we could prove the age of an animal that was penalised for dentition, and that was reversed after, you know, they were good about it, but we had to prove it, and so that penalty was corrected. But yeah, I mean, I know what Leigh's saying about the carcass size and that, and you know, my concern is that, you know, most people are breeding probably higher yielding cattle and bigger cattle, and those cattle aren't finished at 540 kilos, which is 540, 550, which is generally what you've got to aim at to get in the MSA grid. Those cattle aren't finished. You know, they're not cotted up, as we'd say, and finished and flush. You know, they're, unfortunately, I think the customer's getting quite often a poor eating quality product because we're trying to meet a weight requirement, not a quality of carcass requirement.
Thanks, Gordon. Further out on the flat, Ali via the chat says any discrepancies in sheep processing that anyone may have experienced. Any comment there? And Sarah, can you comment on that?
The MSA's got a program for sheep meat. It's a lot less, very much a pathways program. It's not a complex grading system, if you like the beef cattle. But although fat score is part of the requirements, it's an AusMeat standard measurement again for measuring fat score. There are a couple of different ways to do it, but it is an AusMeat standard. Objective carcass technologies that will, we're investigating technologies or cameras, if you like, to do quality measurements, so or MSA measurements, and for ones that will do yield. I mean, ideally, and it probably can't come soon enough, that when we can tell the true yield of an animal and the true eating quality of an animal together, that comes together to tell you about whole carcass value. So rather than having a 0.5 kilo, being discounted, if you like, being half a kilo out of a weight range, it actually then becomes more of a continuum of value, not a black and white cutoff on grids. I think that would be the ideal situation that we are working towards, hopefully.
Is it worth just defining that or discussing that, what ossification means, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. And it's very easy to assume some of those terms when you look at it every day, all day. So ossification is when you look down a vertebrae of an animal, and it's in humans, it's in all animals. It's when the vertebrae, the cartilage within the vertebrae starts to turn into bone. So if you look at young children that are very flexible or full of cartilage, as we get a little bit older and get a bit stiffer, that's actually ossification occurring in our own spine. And so we look at that as an indicator of maturity of the animal. And it happens naturally. So ossification does happen just naturally as the animal gets older. It can get accelerated by things like an animal having an early setback nutritionally or with an injury. If they have a growth path that is quite up and down, that ossification score will get accelerated. So the linkage there to the meat is that when ossification has increased, you actually get more connective tissue starting to build up within the muscles of the meat, which that starts to contribute to meat being tougher. Some of that stuff takes a bit longer to cook out and so on. So that's the connection between, that's why if you had, I think Gordon said animal age, I mean, the best thing to help with eating quality, the actual animal's age would be very useful to have, but it's just realistically, it's very hard to have on all cattle in the country. So we use ossification, as basically an indicator of growth path. And we measure that, we look at that against carcass weight. So we're looking really for a weight for age type measurement as well.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. We've got a couple of chat comments slash questions, which I'll just read, and then I think after that we might move on to the next subject, eh? So, firstly, from John Dawkins, he said, we've seen significant difference in MSA when we get knocked back from a Friday kill, Monday grade, to a Thursday kill, Friday grade. Can you think of any practical way that will work with the abattoirs that we can get grading done after marbling has developed a bit further?
So yeah, this is something we've looked at, because if we could have a week of Fridays, everybody would kill on a Friday, because everybody wants the Friday kill slot, because especially if you're dealing in cattle like Wagyu, where marbling is a feature of those cattle, but often it's sold with a marbling claim on them as well. And that extra chilling time actually does make the marbling solidify, if you like, a bit more in the meat. So it becomes more visible, and so the marbling score tends to be higher as well. I guess there's actually been an MLA project that looked at this recently, and if we could get them to chill them longer, that would be ideal for marbling. But I guess we've got to work with the processes to try and get the most chill time as possible. We probably see in that project that we've done recently with MLA, and I can flick the link, Esther, so people can read the report, but I think it was something like about past 18 hours chill time, there wasn't a significant jump up in some marbling scores, if you like. But yeah, so the processes can start grading after 12 hours, after 8 hours, even if the carcasses have been processed a certain way. But I think after about 18 would be ideal. Yeah, so it's just, I guess, trying to get as much chill time as possible.
That's great, Sarah. That report would be useful, and we can certainly circulate that so people get a better understanding of the relationship between the post-kill period and its effect on marbling.
Sure.